Marshall Emmanuel. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. I teach horticulture and crop science related courses at the university. I'm also the principal investigator for the Life Science Cannabis Research Group. I am the vice chair for the Bureau of Standards Technical Cannabis Group, where I develop 3 standards: cultivation standard, processing standard, packaging and labeling standard. I'm also a consultant to the government of Dominica to draft their legislation. I've also engaged in international collaborations with the Humboldt Seed Company, which is one of the largest producers in North America. And I've also managed to receive funding from BioBiz Worldwide, which is an organic fertilizer company that has been supplying Europe in terms of cannabis fertilizers for the past 30 years. And I was recently recognized by Leaf magazine as one of the influencers globally influencing cannabis policy in the world. So I bring my wealth of experience here to be able to influence the process, and I am here to contribute in a meaningful way, and we look to get this industry moving from the perspective of developing an integrated supply chain from the cultivation to actually consumption. So I also gave a presentation last night that more looked at the economics and the policy framework surrounding cannabis, but my talk today is going to be focused on cultivation and more so understanding the cannabis quality assurance that will be needed to engage commerce in the cannabis value chain. So we all know that cannabis, ganja, marijuana, herb is a very integral part of Caribbean culture, from a religious point of view, from ceremonial rites, and bringing economic viability to marginalized communities who have understood the risk in terms of cultivating cannabis within the illicit market. So cannabis has been in the Caribbean for quite some time, from the 1600s all up to the 21st century, and it has been a very malangled relationship, particularly during the Prohibition era, where cannabis was criminalized by the colonial powers, and this took place from 1913. But prior to that, we also saw where the British Crown pretty much imported cannabis from southern India for supporting the indentured laborers' culture based on their spirituality from the sadhus and so forth. So some years ago, I always understood the notion that cannabis was brought to the Caribbean via the indentured laborers, right? But so I went to England, and I asked the herbarium specialist to show me all the samples that were collected from the British Crown in the British West Indies. And it shows me that on my right-hand side, there are 2 samples where you can see the exact date, but it shows 1822 and 1809. So emancipation took place in 1845. So that actually predates the arrival of indentured laborers. But moving past emancipation, the cannabis displayed here seems to display some different morphological characteristics, and this shows that on closer examination using microscopic examinations, we saw that the higher presence of trichome glands was seen on those plants post-emancipation, and this signals that the plant previous to emancipation was pretty much used for like coverage and fiber, but past emancipation, we see that those plants must have been used for its psychoactive properties. So when we look at the Eastern Caribbean, we see that in 1968, the West Indian Federation was formed, And we saw where, at the Caribbean Free Trade Association, CARIFTA, was formed to facilitate intra-regional trade. But we know in 2026, we know intra-regional trade has been extremely low based on commerce and services, goods and services being traded among CARICOM states. But the federal palm and the federal maple were initiated to facilitate that trade and economic integration via the formation of CARIFTA. And this is where we first started to see cannabis entering the Eastern Caribbean shores, where these boats would move from Guyana to Trinidad all the way to Jamaica, stopping in each Caribbean territory. And Jamaica, being ahead, saw the opportunity in terms of moving cannabis via the illicit market, and this pretty much set up a sort of commodity-based cannabis movement where the economic integration of a horticultural commodity was seen. And we also saw where the cement boats coming from like Colombia also brought South American cannabis to the Eastern Caribbean shores. So when we speak, we normally hear about this terminology, indica, sativa, right? And I would just like to say that there has been a common classification of these two varieties based on their morphological characteristics. So we were traditionally taught that sativas are more narrow leaf plants, and indicas would have those broadleaf plants. But in the taxonomic realms, where in 1753 the botanist called Carl Linnaeus, who described cannabis, found cannabis growing in Eastern Europe, which was known as Eurasia, and those samples were actually classified as cannabis sativa. And in the taxonomic, this speaks about cannabis that is used for its coverage, for fiber, because we all know cannabis has the strongest tree fiber